Started. Are we ready to hit record?
We are on the screen.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Ulmer, Chair of the Board of Accountancy Pipeline Committee. I am calling this public meeting to order. Today is Friday, February 9th, 2024, and the time is 10:04 a.m. This meeting is being held via Zoom video and is being recorded. Please be sure to mute your mic through Zoom. When you want to speak, please use the raise your hand or please raise your hand or use your hand feature and unmute when called upon and mute yourself when done speaking. Committee members, the board liaison, and support staff can ask to speak at any time. For any members of the public observing this meeting, please use the public comment opportunity the committee will extend at each meeting unless specifically called upon. If you have public comment, please limit it to the topic of the committee's work. Please do not use the chat room for any discussions. Should any technical issues arise, we will pause the meeting until they are resolved. We will now take a roll call of the members and guests. Present by Zoom are, starting with the committee members, Elizabeth Ulmer, Chair. Mary?
Here. Mary Savage.
Can you identify yourself by full name, please?
Mary Savage.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Cynthia Killingsworth, present.
Claire?
Claire Costin, present on Zoom.
Sherry?
Sherry McPherson, OSCPA, present, guest.
Logan?
Logan Steele, Board of Accountancy Liaison.
And then at the OSCPA?
Scott Wright, committee member, in person at the Board of Accountancy office.
All right, that's what I meant to say.
Martin Piccioni, Executive Director, present at the board office. And then I think
board
there we
staff
go.
present at the office, but operating BOA admin.
Great, thank you all. All right, let's go ahead and move to our agenda. So I'd like everybody to review, and do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. This is Scott Wright.
Cynthia Killingsworth, second.
Great, thank you. Public comment. Sherry, I thought, are you still considered a member of the public attending this?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess you're our only member of the public. Is there anything you would like to share or comment on before we move on?
No.
Elizabeth,
Yeah.
before we get there, we need to actually do the vote on adopting the
Oh,
agenda.
I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you. Thanks for keeping me straight on my rules of order. So could all in favor of the agenda say aye?
Aye.
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 Agenda passes. All right, now moving to public comment. Sherry?
Yes, thank you very much. I would report to the committee that the OSCPA Board of Directors met just recently and did affirm support for OSCPA staff involvement with the the proposal coming from the Pipeline Committee. And the reason that would be OSCPA Board of Directors, not OSCPA Educational Foundation, is because OSCPA provides staffing, administrative staffing to the Ed Foundation. So that's always a nice thing to make sure our board of directors are in place with that. And so with that, I've also provided Chris Dalvig, president of the Ed Foundation, background details on things and keeping him in the mix. And we'll be talking, further with our Ed Foundation as we go forward. But there was a lot of excitement. And so thank you very much for your efforts related to Pipeline and OSCPA's support. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sherry. All right, so we're going to move into work session. I anticipate this will be a pretty short meeting. I'm going to go ahead and share my document. I think that'll make life a little bit easier. This is the same document that I had sent to, Martin had sent to all of you. Could I have screen sharing, please, on Zoom?
Yeah,
Yes.
Andrew. Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Okay. So hopefully you've all had a chance to take a little bit of a look at this. We're really the issue here is as we've gone through this, I'm hoping we can just quickly finalize this. I went back through my notes and there were a few open items I thought that we should just discuss. So I'm going to open the comments in these. So one of my concerns when I just had some time to sit back and look at this is that aimed at increasing the number, there's so many factors that affect the number of Oregon College students that we're not going to be able to measure this in a particularly reliable way. So I wondered if we should walk that back just a bit. I suggested some alternative wording, but I'm by no means wedded to that. Logan?
Wondering if some wording around reducing financial barriers would be useful here, because we can measure that like very directly. And it also, you know, like the preferably with financial need part seems like not clearly attached to the goal. The goal really is to, you know, break down financial barriers and get more people in. And so we can maybe even take that part out to make it simpler.
That's a great suggestion. What are other folks' thoughts on that, or other candidates for approaching this?
Madam Chair, just as a question, the highlighted section aimed at increasing the number, is that new language or is that different language? I guess I'm trying to figure that out. Refresh my memory, please.
This was the language that was sent to, that we came up with after the last at the last meeting, and that was sent to all of you after the last meeting.
So the highlighted language is what's in the draft right now. That is not proposed new language. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, it felt a little problematic when I read it again. So if we were to Claire, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I like Logan's idea, and in thinking about this, part of the goal in increasing the number of students is because we're trying to reduce barriers to access to the profession. So, you know, something that is measurable, and barriers to access I know is vague, but financial barriers or something, if we're looking for a way to measure this, I think instead of increasing the number of students, making it more accessible in some way to describe it in that way, still that gets at the goal. So I just wanted to second what Logan said.
So that's going to require a little more wordsmithing here.
Well, if I may, again, the whole purpose was, in fact, to increase the number of folks going into the pipeline. So I think losing that language kind of makes the whole purpose of why we're doing this very different from what our charge is. Granted, yes, we can increase the number of people in the pipeline, we believe, by reducing financial barriers, but our main goal is to put more people in the pipeline. I think losing that out of it undercuts exactly what we're supposed to be doing.
Logan?
I wonder if we could just keep both aspects of that. And so increasing the number of students in the pipeline by reducing financial barriers, which is still something I think we can measure when we say that the goal. I mean, it depends on how you look at the goal, I guess, but at least by reducing financial barriers, we have something we can measure more directly. And we still keep that overall goal in mind.
I raised the point of not losing the increase in the I agree, having the both of them there, but I think it's important that the goals say that one of our major pieces is to try to increase the pipeline. By whatever means.
Cynthia? Nope, you're muted.
Of course. I like that too. It keeps in mind the end goal, but it's also identifying the tool that we're focusing on to accomplish that.
It's interesting, but by having it end with reducing financial barriers, I would, and using the word aimed, I feel like it does keep the goal, but it puts the focus more on reducing financial barriers as being measurable. How does, so it sounds like, okay, so to establish a scholarship stream from surplus B of A funds aimed at increasing the number of Oregon College and University students who are pursuing, I think here, let's say higher education and accounting with intent to obtain professional licensure by reducing financial barriers. It's a little wordy.
Do we care if it's wordy?
Well, I think that helped a little bit. Who are? Claire?
It's a nitpicky, but if you do a comma after licensure, just to separate that clause, otherwise,
Yeah.
is someone going to think that they're trying to like connect the licensure and the barriers together, and those are two separate thoughts. So, I think to establish a scholarship stream from surplus funds by reducing financial barriers, and then the middle piece explains the purpose, and it makes more sense to me.
Do you mean to move it, or you're
No,
okay?
it's just that comma.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
I feel like this is vastly improved. Any other comments?
On that wording, or just in general?
Let's see if we're comfortable with this, and then we can deal with the other ones. Okay, sounds like we can move on that one. All right, so let me get rid of this. Why is that not liking me? Okay, I'll deal with that later. So scholarship preferences. So I just didn't know if this was necessary to integrate in here. I went before Martin and I sent these materials out, I went back through all of my handwritten notes, and that was something that I believe, Cynthia, you raised after speaking with your financial aid director, that it's not a good idea to prorate. And my thought process was, I'm concerned that we want these are set up as preferences. They're not mandates. And institutional knowledge gets lost as people turn over. So I just wanted to make sure that we had a decision about whether that should be included in here in any way. I just wanted to throw that back out to the group.
Since no one's talking, I think that's great to have in there. I think it's important to clarify.
Do you have some suggested wording? I mean, we could say something to the effect of financial need, scholarship amounts should be granted at a sufficient level to be meaningful, and relative to the cost of education, and irrespective. I mean, what we don't want to do, though, is if somebody's taking one class, give them a huge amount of money. You know, I mean, that wouldn't make sense, right? Like, it wouldn't make sense for somebody who's taking just one class to get the same amount as 4 credits as somebody who's taking 16. That I don't think makes a lot of sense. So is there a way to say that?
If I may, Elizabeth, you've been on the foundation, education foundation, OSCPA education foundation. Most of the scholarships are $3,000 to $4,000, is that correct?
Yes.
And
sometimes a
in
little bit
light,
lower, but yeah, like 2,500. I don't think Sherry, I don't think anything goes below 2,500.
Right, and since this is a work session, it's probably okay. Is Martin okay for me to chime in once in a while?
Yeah.
Okay.
I,
First-
So
Yeah.
so
So
let me finish my question. I want to get that in place. So the term meaningful in light of today's educational costs, is even $2,500 meaningful when a tuition is whatever it is these days, $10,000, $20,000. So I guess what I don't want to get to set up is that this indicates that these should be $10,000 scholarships when what the OSCPA Foundation is comfortable with is $3,000 scholarships. I want to make it fit within the framework of what the foundation is comfortable doing. They're going to be our boots on the ground.
fair.
Oops.
Sherry and then Cynthia.
Okay, so the society currently, or Ed Foundation currently is providing $2,500 scholarships. Occasionally there may be a $3,000 scholarship. What I was also thinking about too is, as I was looking at the word sufficient and meaningful, to make sure that, I mean, Elizabeth, especially to your point of how when time passes, everybody doesn't remember, you know, what was meant originally, that I worry a little bit all of a sudden that context could be, oh, this is like a full ride scholarship, right? So that's not what we're intending either. And I think, Scott, that reaches back to your comment as well.
Cynthia? And then Claire?
Is it problematic? It seems like we maybe have had that conversation, but is it problematic to say relative to the need of the student? I can't remember if we've gone down that road before.
I don't think we have gone down that road. Claire, do you want to say yours and then we can maybe open up both comments for discussion?
Yeah, so mine was in the meaningful relative to the cost of education as a representative of a private school with a high cost of education. What I don't want is for the foundation to feel like, well, this student's paying a higher tuition, therefore they should have more money than the student who is not. So, you know, from an equity standpoint, what you're trying to get at, it sounds like, is the amount of scholarship like commensurate with the number of hours the student is taking. So if a student's in one class versus a full-time student, it sounds like that's the part that brought this, you know, that's the intention behind this. But as we start talking about the cost of education, then there's different tuition. And what if the, you know, some students have, so we give a lot of merit aid to our students. So their cost of education after merit aid might be similar to a state school, but without knowing that, it puts the foundation in a position to try and assess what the cost of education is for the student. So I have a, you know, concerns, I think, with wording it that way. And then my other thought, and this is a kind of a general question, I assume it's implied when we say community college or four-year institution that those institutions are in Oregon. Does that need to be explicit, or is it automatically implied and it's not necessary to spell it out just in that first bullet point?
It needs to be in Oregon.
Yeah, so we just to add maybe in Oregon at the end of the first bullet point to make sure that it's clear. That was just a small thing.
Or after at a Oregon community college or four-year institution.
Yeah.
Yep.
And since you're in that paragraph, I just want to chime in and say I'm really happy that we're keeping the part-time explicitly in there. Just want to say that loud and clear because we've had a number of conversations around how impactful it would be to have funding for folks that are trying to kind of get this done on a part-time basis. And I'm really glad to have that in there explicitly.
Do we need to define the part-time? Because to Elizabeth's earlier point, if they're taking one class, that's part-time. But, you know, at least a minimum of 2 classes, or, you know, no?
No, because what that might preclude is somebody might be only taking one class, but getting this scholarship would allow them to go up to 2.
That makes sense. I just wanted, it was
Yeah.
concern.
Logan?
This Mary's point might have rendered mine not useful, but I thought about being very explicit and saying a cost per credit hour, like $150 to $250 per credit hour or something like that, as our amount.
Well, because we want this guidance to be, I mean, this is going into the contract.
Mhm.
And so it has to be something that can change over time. So that's why we're trying to keep it really general, but still get to intent. And this is what what I was struggling with as I was reflecting on it before our meeting, is do we, if somebody's going to school part-time, it may be simply because they don't have enough money to go more than, to either pay the tuition to go more than part-time. And I've had students tell me that over and over again, or they have to work so many hours to get the tuition that they can't go full-time. So the question is, should we even, so I thought what I heard from that Cynthia relayed from her financial aid person is you shouldn't be cutting the scholarships for somebody who's part-time. Was that right, Cynthia? They were advocating to have the same scholarships, whether you're full or part-time.
Well, I mean, there was two different conversations. One is it's very important to be funding part-time students. That's the majority of our community college students, a vast majority of them. So that's really important. And as an aside, he mentioned just the burden on the Oregon Society of CPAs, the foundation, to if you say it has to be determined by the number of credits taken, that puts a lot of load on the foundation to to make those calculations, to get the information to do that. And I think he was saying, be careful.
Just throwing that out there. Claire?
It feels like there's maybe I'm overthinking this, but it feels like there's the concern here about number of credit hours, but also student financial need. So I think maybe where I'm to try and figure out exactly the purpose of this bullet point is our goal. Like, what is it that we are trying to say to the committee with this bullet point? Is it give the same amount to everyone, regardless of credit hours, regardless of cost of education? Is it that some type of relative context should be taken into consideration? If so, what is that based on? So I think I'm a little bit I don't have clarity in my own brain, and I know it's 10:30 in the morning, but I still feel like I'm rolling down the runway, getting set up for the day. But I don't have clarity in my own brain what it is that we're trying to imply in this bullet point, what the intent is. So I think I'm kind of stuck.
I don't know, maybe I'm making something out of nothing, but my concern was, is this going to be one of these things where we go, oh, well, they're only that the OSCPA could potentially say, well, they're only a part-time student, therefore let's give them a half scholarship. And the problem with that is that you don't know if that student is half-time because of lack of funds and could potentially be going full-time. And so I think I started going down the wrong direction with what I originally wrote. My concern is that there will be some proration of scholarships if a student is currently not going full-time. In my experience, students don't go part-time by choice. Not once they're in the program. They might do it initially. Oh, let me test the waters. Do I really want to pursue this post-bac accounting? Do I really want to go back and keep going for my bachelor's degree? But then once they're in school, it's financial issues that keep them at part-time. It's rarely anything else. Cynthia and then Mary.
Am I understanding this right? That these scholarships are going to be delivered directly to the colleges, and they are only going to be used for tuition and books. So doesn't the issue kind of resolve itself in that if someone gets a $2,000 scholarship and then chooses to only take one class at PCC, that this isn't money just going in their pocket that won't be used for it? I'm just trying to think out loud about this.
I believe that's a restriction that the donors can make, that can be made on the scholarships, but typically, Cynthia, you can jump in here because you had more direct conversations about this. My understanding is excess scholarship funds are remitted to students and they can use it
Okay.
for whatever is needed.
Okay.
I didn't ask that question of him, so that's.
Okay. Mary?
I think we might be trying to do too much with one bullet point here. I think it might be enough to just say, you know, keep the on the full and part-time basis at an Oregon Community College and four-year institution. Leave it at that just to identify that at that point in time, we've got a part-time basis and full-time basis in Oregon. And then move on because and it can be a smaller bullet point underneath, but we aren't limited with, 4 bullet points. Because otherwise it starts getting too big and we're trying to identify too many different things in one sentence.
So what is the wording you're suggesting?
I think it's fine the way it is. All we do is add the at an Oregon Community College or four-year institution. Stop right there. And
Are you able to look at the document I'm working on right now, Mary? I think you're on your phone, right?
No, I'm on.
I added that already, the Oregon
Oh,
Community
okay.
College. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
wondering is, should I
Yeah.
take out that new bullet point, the one I'm highlighting right now?
Oh, I can't see that. All right. Okay, you're talking about the financial need component?
Yeah, it's under the financial need. It's a
Okay,
separate bullet
okay.
point.
I was on the wrong bullet point there.
Got it.
Okay, so that's my bad.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So based on your comment just a few minutes ago, is that if a scholar, as you understand it, if a scholarship right now is more than the cost of the education, the money is remitted to the student? Did I hear you indicate that?
That's
that is
my
your belief?
understanding. That is my understanding, if
Okay.
they are the way it works from financial aid. I can go back and double check that, but I thought that was something that came across from my financial aid folks.
So if that's the case, then I really would have a problem with saying that they will be granted a scholarship regardless of how many hours they take. Because you could have a person take one class, get $2,500, and they're putting $2,000 in that pocket. That is not what this is intended to do, in my opinion.
I don't know that I can pull up that email that fast.
Now, if you said that the grantor can provide provisions otherwise, that would be guidance that we might want to put into the contract with the OSCPA, because the OSCPA would be the one granting the scholarship.
Sherry, do you know the answer to that from the foundation side?
I don't, but well, of course, most of these scholarships have been universities, so I'm not sure how much was actually left over before too. And I don't recall discussion as we've been giving those funds out, Elizabeth, that they were either part-time or full-time. I think I was just thinking they were full-time enrolled students at like university. We've given out some community college scholarships, not too many. Those are $500, and we have not assessed the number of credits community college students have been taking.
But the OSCPA say you're only eligible if you're if you're going to school to full-time students.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've always recalled. I don't remember ever part-time. Yeah, I don't remember part-time at all.
And I guess one potential argument is we could grant them more than the one class to encourage them to take more classes, but I'm not sure that's a risk I think we should take. Either they're going to take a class which the scholarship will pay for, or they're not. I don't want to put the money in their pocket to encourage them to take another class, because I think that's setting things up for gamesmanship.
It feels like we should have the answer to that and have that detailed either in the contract or within here.
Can you see the email I just put on the screen? Or do I
Yes.
need- Okay. This was a very complicated response from our financial aid director. I don't think this answers it, but there are amounts dispersed to the students if they receive more money than the cost of attendance.
That's
Which
what I
would
read that
seem-
last bullet point.
I was gonna say, which would seem logical because in essence, the money is for the student, it's going to them. I don't remember ever having a conversation about this at Ed Foundation about what if we've given them more.
So here's the way I would ask you maybe to think about this. We have asked students to demonstrate financial need. Period. And if a student can't make rent, they certainly are not going to be pursuing their accounting degree. The situation that I consistently think back to that I found troubling was an OSCPA, a high level of scholarship going to the child of a individual who I know did not have to pay tuition because they were an employee and were not in a financial need situation. That student, their tuition cost was probably about $1,500 a year. So there was absolutely a refund going to this student. So that's a very, very one-off situation because it was given to a student without recognition of financial need. If we say financial need, I think that concern about whether some of this could be used to go buy Starbucks really diminishes. Claire and Cynthia?
So as I'm thinking about financial need, I'm thinking about a lot of students who have reached out to me with concerns on, resource scarcity and insecurity. And so I think if the intention is that this tuition is only to be used for tuition and books, full stop, nothing else, is that something that needs to be spelled out? Because if a student who is going to school part-time working gets a reimbursement and uses it to feed themselves, is that a problem from an equity standpoint? I think that is, as we're looking at what you have here, food, rent, transportation, et cetera, is absolutely part of the cost of being a student. So if that's something that is, this issue only to be used for these specific educational expenses, period, then, I think I don't know if that's something that needs to be spelled out. Maybe it doesn't, but it sounded like there was maybe a point raised that if it was going to be for anything other than educational expenses, that it might not be okay. So I just, I wanted to kind of ask, is that something that we need to consider if there is a disbursement to the student? Is we're not going to track what they spend it on. And it may be that they don't need it, but it may be that they very well do. And that this is not only going to help them go to school, but it's going to help them feed themselves. And to me, that is I think that's a noble purpose, but that's just my own opinion.
Cynthia, and then we'll go back to you, Scott.
Elizabeth, can you pull up the draft again?
Yes.
So echoing what Claire just stated, I will say that our most precarious situations are a student trying to make their rent. So that is what probably puts our students in the greatest jeopardy in our classrooms of being able to finish a term, is just those basic needs. So I think that's important. And I'm just wondering if the bullet point for financial need is getting us there and whether we even need the scholarship amounts. should be granted irrespective of the number of credits, and just knowing that the intent of this is to meet financial needs is enough.
Scott?
I want us to keep in mind that we're trying to be stewards of public money. And some of the conversation we're having right now is converting this, in my opinion, more to a welfare program than to a scholarship funding program. If we're saying that we're comfortable with supporting the basic needs of students above and beyond their schooling needs, that's becoming a general welfare issue, not a use of funds to promote public accounting, in my opinion, for the pipeline. I think we're starting to go, they're all very noble goals. But in terms of trying to be a steward of the public money that we're talking about potentially dispersing out, we're really moving off target if we're talking about providing funding above and beyond educational costs, direct educational costs.
Logan?
I think another way to look at this is more from an acceleration standpoint. So students could work full time and take one class, and we can make that class free effectively. Or over more, I don't know what liberal with our definitions here. We could provide more money than that course, which would allow them to maybe work less and take more courses and accelerate their progression, right? So that's one way to look at it, where I think it is maybe a legitimate use of funds in that sense. But I think it might be an exaggeration to frame this as like an all or nothing question, where they either can pursue accounting or not. It's more a question of how much capacity in their lives do they have to take courses. And so I think that's a good way to think about it. I don't know if that doesn't give an answer, but I just want to give that framing.
So another piece to this that I would toss out is it's very unlikely that a student would receive certainly at a four-year university, enough funds that this alone would not be covering, that this alone would exceed the cost of tuition. Because I would hope, and maybe this is where we go, I don't know, see this is the slippery slope. If I were looking at this, I would say, a student who's at a community college, their full cost of tuition is about 40% of a four-year in-state public school. So their scholarships maybe should be at the 40% level of what it costs to the other schools. I don't know. I mean, that to me seems reasonable. These students are most likely receiving a full, they have financial need, which we have said that this should be financial need. That's very, very clear that we've made this need-based. These students are not just receiving this scholarship. So another way of looking at it is this scholarship is going towards the full cost of education, and perhaps the other scholarships now are surplus and go towards helping them pay their rent. Logistically, I don't know what this would do to administration of a scholarship at a school if we mandated that this was tuition. I don't know the answer to that. Claire?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think if every school handles things the way they handle them, private schools are going to handle things differently than public schools. And at the end of the day, in a situation like the one that you described with the person who was the child of an employee and didn't need the scholarship, if that's the university policy that excess is dispersed to the student, and then the student may use it for education, they may use it for something else, there's no way for the foundation to ex post monitor what they're doing with the funds and to put the restrictions on the university. I guess maybe if we said it's only for tuition and books, then they could put it in an account for the student for a future semester or something, but that seems like it makes it an onerous application of and management of the scholarship for the registrar's offices and the financial aid and financial offices of the schools. So my expectation would be that there won't be that many people for whom this is the case, and that for those for whom this is the case, what do you say, like, provide us an accounting of what you did with the extra money? Like, there's no way that could be monitored. So it feels a little bit like if that's what the school does, that's what the school does. And I don't know if we have any way to influence that and, you know, whether or not we would even want to try.
Cynthia?
Well, when we're talking about public funds, the amount of scholarships in excess of their tuition and books is taxable. So they do pay back into the system if they do go past.
And this is a minor point, but the book issue, when the scholarships are restricted in this way, I'm aware of this because of the Veterans Administration program for vets. And it's hugely problematic because they have to purchase their books at the PSU bookstore so that they can get so it's a direct payment. Not only is this wasteful because the PSU bookstore in many cases charges twice as much as when the students buy directly from the publisher, but it also presents a barrier in terms of access if they are going to school from outside the area and they need hard copies, which we encourage students to still use hard copies because there's a lot of evidence that says they learn better from that in accounting. So anyway, so that's kind of where I'm at with that. And I think that if you start to say books, it just creates an obstacle that is almost insurmountable. Scott?
I guess to clarify my point, I'm not looking to say that the contract should be precise and indicate that it only be, you know, that they have to account for the money or anything else. I guess really, in my opinion, dropping the third bullet point, the one that is highlighted right now, kind of gets there. We're going to have to rely on the foundation to do the due diligence of what it is. Our goal is to say, look, we're trying to get people into the accounting profession through part-time, full-time, but the scholarship's going to be there as determined by the foundation. We want you to end up in accounting. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details of what this goal is. The contract might have a little bit more, but the goals probably should be higher. And as I said, I think of dropping that third bullet point, because again, that is a goal saying it's going to be granted even if person's taking one class and they're getting $2,500. I think getting that third bullet point out makes me feel a lot better in its entirety.
How does the rest of the committee feel about this? Is there anybody who feels strongly that that should be left in, I guess is the question, or some version of that? Show of hands, does anybody raise your hand if you feel like it should be left in. Okay, then we have our solution. Wait, Scott, did I just see you raise your hand?
No, thumbs up.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at you very small. These are very small pictures because I've got the document up. Okay, great. This last one should be quick. Scott, does that help you?
Well, I guess, so for clarification for the committee, I had submitted a comment back to Martin on the draft where we talk about for non-degree seeking accounting students. Now you've added the post-baccalaureate, but I guess that what are we saying by saying non-degree seeking, whether with post-baccalaureate or otherwise? My comment to Martin was that if a degree of some sort, any sort, doesn't have to be accounting, but any sort is almost mandatory to be licensed in Oregon, that we're going to give scholarships to somebody who's not seeking a degree. That seems to me counterintuitive, again, to the idea that we're trying to put people in the public accounting arena, the licensure, and they have to have a degree of some sort.
They do. That's why I put the word post-baccalaureate in there. Portland State has had a post-baccalaureate accounting certificate program for, I think, going on 50 years. And what it does is it provides students who already have a degree in something, because you're not required to have an accounting degree to get licensed in Oregon. It provides them with a certificate that verifies they have taken the classes that would qualify them to sit for the CPA exam.
The certificate is not a degree.
Okay.
Correct.
The issue is, I think, can I try this in just my own little language for a second?
Yeah.
So in my very simple way of thinking about it is, I think the reason we tried to stay away from exclusively doing the degree seeking students is because there will be cases in the pipeline coming through where folks already have a degree, but they now need the accounting specific education to meet the requirements for ultimate licensure. And so the degree piece is already behind them, but they no longer seeking a degree, they're seeking the accounting coursework, whether it's through the post-bac or other venues. And I think all we were trying to do is not exclude that scenario from the eligibility for a scholarship. But maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but that's the way I think about it.
It's just a little more background. Currently, we have about 30% of our quote undergraduates that are actually non-degree seeking. They are post-baccalaureate certificate students, and almost all of them sit for the CPA exam. When we take a downturn in the economy and accounting becomes a way for students to retool, I saw this in 2009, 2010, that number bumped up to 40% for PSU. Do Oregon State and Oregon have a similar certificate?
We do on the books. We haven't. It has been active, but we were reactivating it. So, and I think it's a definite yes. We need to have it.
Okay.
I'm not aware of one at U of O.
Okay. Cynthia, you had your hand up.
I think I kind of sorted this out, but I know that we're talking about that non-degree seeking post-baccalaureate, so that's specific to that, but up above where we mentioned degree or certificate. Yeah. So that's relevant to our community college students who start out just seeking a less than 2-year degree, and they're chunking off a certificate, and they may not know where it's going to lead, and they may need a lot of encouragement, but we see a lot of those students continue on to either get a 2-year degree or continue on to transfer. So even though they may express when they apply for the scholarship that they're only seeking a 1-year certificate so far, I think that we want to encourage those students into the pipeline, because we know a lot of them may continue on even if that.
And as long as we say intend for professional accounting licensure, because your students may be technically in the certificate program because they want to be able to start working on the basis of that certificate while they continue on. So if you couple the certificate, which is why we use just the word certificate. We had a quick conversation. I'm not sure everybody got the nuances of that though. We talked about that. If you combine the first and the last bullet point, that covers those students. I see resumes from our degree seeking students all the time. It is super common that they have that, well, I shouldn't say super common. It's not uncommon to see that certificate that they put on their resume. They have that certificate from a community college because it makes them marketable while they're continuing on their education. Scott?
Cynthia, this is kind of perhaps your area. On our second bullet point, financial need, the sub-bullet point for degree-seeking accounting students, would you rather have that for degree and certificate-seeking accounting students? Because what the community college issues is not a degree, correct? It's a certificate. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, we issue degrees and certificates in accounting.
But I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I
do think I would be more comfortable with that, because I think it's more encouraging to those students yet who that have a decent chance of continuing on, but they may not be comfortable in putting that down in an application that they're degree seeking yet. So the certificate opens the doors to them.
But the financial need is getting at something totally different. The financial need and the two subsequent sub-bullets are talking about how they demonstrate financial need. Students who already have a bachelor's degree do not get they are not able to establish financial need in the same way as a student who has yet to achieve a bachelor's degree. So the certificate students at PCC are able to do a Pell Grant, correct? Okay.
Right.
So all that is saying, Scott, is that for students who already have a bachelor's degree, they can demonstrate financial need in some other way.
Well, not in the first bullet point necessarily. The first bullet point of financial need. So I was asking if Cynthia would be more comfortable with for degree or certificate seeking accounting students.
Because the certificate is confusing. Certificate
Yeah,
is
okay.
encompass, it's not like a degree, it's not defined as clearly as a degree.
I see what you're saying, Elizabeth. And yeah, we need to have clarity to what we're talking about for financial aid purposes. And that particular bullet point is focusing on that.
Because keep in mind, you know, this, as we've said, this is going to be, we understand what we're saying right now, but 10 years down the road, none of it, very few of us may be sitting around this table having this conversation or participating in the guidance that the foundation does or doesn't get from the board or this committee. So it needs to be a little bit evergreen and clear what it's going to mean in 3 years, 4 years down the road when we're not here to say, this is what we meant.
Could we, in that bullet point, say for financial eligible students, demonstrate financial need through?
I mean, basically, this is the kind of thing that somebody needs knowledge of financial aid to understand the distinction between these two, as is evidenced by the conversation that we've had here today.
Okay.
Sherry, you're coming at this from a different perspective. Does this now make sense?
I guess I would say it makes sense to me on what we're trying to accomplish.
You know, another way to do this is simply to say demonstrated financial need and just leave it at that. But I just am afraid this isn't providing enough guidance. If we just said demonstrated financial need. I mean, we were trying to you know, or another way of handling it is demonstrated financial need through such means as Pell Grant eligibility, financial aid eligibility, Oregon Opportunity Grant, or other means. And not draw the distinction between students who could get those types of federal funding and those who are not eligible. That's another way of doing it.
So Elizabeth, you would mean taking degree or certificate out?
Correct. Here,
I kind of
I'll-
like it there, frankly, just
Okay.
because, I mean, you've had a very robust conversation around that. And, you know, what we've talked about related to like PCC and certificates and all that. It's not the first time I've heard of that journey, if you will. Very familiar with it. Frankly, had it myself, you know. But I like the idea that we're keeping we're throwing a wide net by having it in there. I'm kind of afraid that, you know, the certificate, without having certificate in there, that it would pretty much kind of disappear over time.
Yeah. Scott?
So I guess back to the other point, we're talking about the goals here. Would that granular discussion be better in the contract and just leave it in high level terms here in the goals?
Quite frankly, in my mind, this is the precursor to the contract language. I don't think that we're spending our time wisely to do this twice. I think this is the basis of the contract language.
Well, I guess as a follow-up question is this committee then going to be involved in the language of the contract?
I don't know the answer to that. Martin?
Yes.
Because I guess I would say is if we can set our goals with keeping all of this in mind, we can get to that piece in the contract and at least get our goal set up instead of us wordsmithing it for the next 3 meetings. And I'm as guilty as anybody with little tweak, little tweak, little tweak. I get that. But if we can come up with the goals and then work our way through on the contract, as long as it's the same committee, we're going to get there.
Well, yeah, and part of the reason why I think this should basically be what we put in the contract and not doing, 2 versions of it is, again, with that contract language, we want to provide simply guidance without getting too granular for the OSCPA. Although, Martin, what's the duration of these contracts? I mean, that all comes down to, how long we have the funding source, right? Is there a duration on this one? Well, I imagine there must be.
Yeah, so that's a really excellent question because you're absolutely right that, we may have to go down a slightly different road than what happened up in Washington, because Washington was strictly a contract around a one-time transfer of funds, and the contract essentially established amortization of that one-time piece. And this contract would effectively have to take a little bit of a different approach if the board ultimately were to embrace, and this committee were to embrace kind of making this more of an ongoing thing, that it's not just a one-time transfer, but that the board also endorses a ongoing piece of funding around this. And so that's probably one of the bigger unknowns for us, but at minimum, I would think the initial contract would have to cover at least the period of the 2025-27 biennium, because that's when the disbursement occurs and the initial setup work has to occur, early on in that biennium, really with most of the work needing to be done in fall of 2025 in terms of transfers and implementation and getting OSCPA at foundation ready. So I think the first contract term would have to be at least a 2-year time period, and then probably would need to be updated if there is an ongoing component thereafter.
Okay, so it seems like we have 2 choices. If we want to just be done with this document, I think we could just say demonstrated financial need as appropriate for the student classification or something like that, or even just demonstrated financial need. And then pull the rest of this out of here. But that also places a burden on the OSCPA to know how to do it. To the extent there are academics on the Ed Foundation, I mean, that can fall on them. This leads into sort of the conversation about how, what about scalability of this, because the current format of how this is done, if there's a huge injection of cash, which as we expect, the current process is going to be probably much too time consuming. So some of that could, though, be just put onto a smaller group at the OSCPA to figure that out. I don't know how specific we're going to want the contract language. My sense was more general guidelines, not granular.
So it becomes a question of where the granular piece is, whether it's in the goals or in the contract, I guess, if provide that type of guidance.
Yeah, I don't think this is granular, what we've got. This is really quite general. And what we're really conveying here is that the OSCP, the Ed Foundation, needs to take into account the category of applicant before determining the type of financial aid. And my thought was in wanting to put this in this way is that we're doing the Ed Foundation a favor by letting them know up front what needs to be in their application. I mean, I think about this from a survey design or, perspective, or a form design. There's going to have to be a branching in there that says, if you are X, here's what we need to see. If you are Y, here's what we need to see.
Well, Elizabeth, and I'm in agreement with you because currently we have some folk, we have endowments. And for example, one of them, would prefer that there be a single parent as the recipient. So there's guidelines for some of those endowments already. I mean, for what you're describing here makes perfect sense to me.
Cynthia?
Just back to the scholarship preferences, the wording of it, it seems like the first point is demonstrating the type of student we want to see, what kind of education they're pursuing. It's defining that, it seems adequately. And then the second bullet point, I liked your idea, Elizabeth, just saying demonstrated financial need through these different possibilities and just making it one sentence. The Pell Grant eligibility, financial aid, Oregon Opportunity Grant, or other means, because we've already defined in the first bullet point what kind of education we want them to be seeking. And it seems like we're a little bit duplicating that down here in financial need. Yeah.
So that.
And you could take out
Then this
means.
would all go away.
We have means duplicated twice in there, so it could just be through Pell Grant eligibility, so on, and other means or other means.
Yeah. And then this goes away, and then the OSCPA needs to know when they do that application that it's very important that this be taken into account.
It's just less confusing, I think, for people that may not understand the
Yeah.
nuances.
I may also be a little scarred by PSU's implementation of a new scholarship application and tracking system 2 years ago that was an absolute disaster because they didn't appropriately take into account a lot of the nuances of scholarships. So we ended up with insufficient applicants for scholarships because of the system. It was awful. And I would hate for that to happen here. So I'm good with this. We talked about having a conversation outside of the contract with OSCPA about how to handle this and about how to, how to help provide guidance so that the administration is smooth. Okay, where are we at? We thought this would be a short meeting. I thought it would be less than an hour. It's 11:07. I know that we all had blocked out 2 hours on our calendar, but I never see a need to fully use it if we don't need to. We might have to revisit some of these issues as we continue to go through the contract and the process of, of having a conversation with the foundation to ensure that they can scale up in a way that is going to that's going to actually get the money in student hands. Scott?
So, and this is probably a question for Martin. We're now starting to talk about the contract on the theory that we at least we haven't yet voted on it, but perhaps this is going to be our goal. Is the DOJ going to write the contract with our input? I mean, physically, how is the contract going to be pulled together so that these pieces we're talking about that we want in the contract can be added at the appropriate time of the drafting process?
Yeah.
And the OSCPA's involvement, how quickly are they going to be pulled into reviewing the contract? Is it going to be presented as a final document to them saying yes or no, or do they participate in the drafting of the document as well? Again, we have to be very sensitive of what they can and can't do and are or aren't willing to do within the framework of them being the ones distributing the money.
Yeah, so the issue is, you know, do we really want, there's two ways to think about this, right? One is, do we want that work to be done before we even know what the legislature does? Right? Because there's a bit of, you know, there's always a bit of risk there, right? So the certain way to go is to say, let's wait until this thing passes, because we shouldn't take more than hopefully 3, 4, 5 months to get through a contracts process. In terms of who's physically drafting it, you're absolutely right that our contracts, even though technically not all of our contracts go through DOJ, there's very few, if anything, that leaves this office that I don't run through DOJ contracts. Quite frankly, I will say this even in a public meeting, there is a truly phenomenal contracts attorney that we've been blessed to work with, that I really hope does not retire before this thing goes through, because I would love to work with her. You will probably remember the name because we worked with her way back when I first got on the board, worked for the board, Karen Johnson, over at the Department of Justice. That is a name that probably will ring a bell for you, and she's a fantastic resource, and I would love to use her for this piece. So that's the how that the when, you know, from an efficiency standpoint, as long as we can have this goal document, I think the next focus for us needs to be that I want to switch to, which I really can do really at the staff level and with DOJ, is the drafting of the legislation itself. Okay. And the fiscal piece. The contracts piece to me is, you know, unless this committee feels otherwise, I kind of feel like it may be better for us to wait until we're after ledge session.
And you may have answered there. So this goal is sufficient to develop the legislative concept to get it potentially adopted.
Yep.
At that point, and then we can do the contract. The legislature's not going to need to see the contract to approve the entire process. Okay, thank you.
I hope that makes sense. I mean, I'm open to reactions from the committee, but that's kind of what my thought process is that, you know, next focus is on the money piece and on the legislative development piece, before we, you know, worry about details of a contract, before we even know that, you know, it's a little bit like, I don't want to count the chickens until it's time to count the chickens.
Fair enough. Okay, so it sounds then like we're done at this point with our objective and preferences. Unless I hear any other comments, it sounds like we're in agreement. This is sufficient. And the rest of these details are things that we will manage when we get to the contract stage. Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Would you like a motion to adopt these as our goals?
I would. You beat me to the punch.
Perfect. Madam Chair, I make a motion to adopt the committee objective document as we see it right now as the Pipeline Committee's objective and goal.
Do I hear a second?
Second?
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm not sure if there's some different format I need to put this in, but I will take out the watermark. And then Martin can distribute it to everybody as a final.
And to vote.
And the vote. Thank you. All in favor of this being the committee goals, raise, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, it passes. Thank you. Okay, so we probably are at a pause then in our committee, if I'm understanding things right from what Martin just said, other than the financial piece. So Martin, one of the things you said to me when we were talking about setting up this meeting is that you were unable to get a quorum for to discuss for the finance subcommittee here.
Yeah.
Do you want to just mention that and see how do you want to proceed with that? Do we
Well,
need
what
another?
I think I've been giving this some thought. So what I think I want to do is I put on the agenda for the board meeting on Thursday of next week, just a clarification of, sometimes when we have committees, there's this generic interplay between when does it make sense for the board to give some direction ahead of time and then the committee picking up the ball versus committee developing something and then bringing it back to the board. And so I quite frankly just generally want to check in with the board around the fiscal piece and the big picture decision making that ultimately, with or without a recommendation from this committee, will have to be done at the board level, right? And so I want to use that piece to get some additional guidance from the board in terms of are there certain pieces where they just want to provide some framework direction to the fiscal piece ahead of time, right? Or do they just want to wait? That's number one. And then number two is, I do think it's likely that I will need to add a member either from this committee or somewhere else so that we can go beyond, the 2-member setup right now that we have because it prevented us from getting quorum, because a 2-member setup, unfortunately, I found out has the disadvantage that if both don't show up,
Or if one don't show up.
sorry, what?
If only one doesn't show
If
up.
only one doesn't show up, right, it means you have a problem with quorum. And then we don't get work done. So I'm looking for some efficiencies, both in terms of what the board might be willing to do itself, as well as by adding another member so that we can get through that work. Because bottom line is, I have to get through the fiscal part of the work in the next 3 to 4 months, because it has to be built in to the board's agency request budget for 2025-27. And that budget has to, number one, go into the approval process no later than August 1, which really means effectively either the regular June board meeting or a special board meeting in the summer is really the only shot at the apple that I have to kind of get all these budgetary pieces through. So I hope that makes sense. So I don't have a choice around the timeline. The only choices that I have is who does what in terms of helping us develop that piece over that time period. I hope that makes sense.
It does. So Martin, I think I'm understanding correctly. We're pretty much at a pause except for the financial piece. So Mark and Scott are working on the financial piece with you. You're looking for one more board member to do that. I know I personally don't have any particular expertise in public budgets, but I'd be happy to serve in that role unless there is somebody just to keep it moving. So that we do have a quorum, but I wonder if perhaps, I don't know, Mary, do you have experience with that? I don't know if there's somebody else who has both capacity and some expertise to lend to that. Or Cynthia, I'm certainly willing to be the warm body. I'm just not sure I bring a lot to the table on that.
I don't specifically have experience in that, but again, I'm happy to be a warm body, I don't mind doing it.
I'm in the same position.
Okay, who's got the most bandwidth? So it sounds like one of the three of us needs to join in on that. Martin, do you want to just let one of us know? Is that appropriate? I don't want anybody to feel bad that they weren't chosen. Or I think it's a prize if you're not chosen.
You're making my work easier and easier.
Yeah, I don't know. Martin, if it makes sense to have the chair do it, I'm perfectly happy to do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's do that just because it makes
Okay.
it easier with the interplay.
That's what I was thinking.
I
And
don't
then
think we will have to do a lot of meetings. I think hopefully we can do a work session and get through most of it.
Okay. That sounds great. And then the other thing that was on our work session was just an announcement. that there's going to be a report out to the board on the February 15th meeting. And you and I, Martin, had talked about that. I'm perfectly happy with Logan doing that. You just need to let me know if you would like me there. I don't feel any need to be there. I think it's pretty concise, and you can share our approved goals with that. That was part of what I was trying to achieve, was to share make it possible for you to share those approved goals. I think you
Awesome.
can
If you
answer
can
any
hit,
questions
if
on
you
it.
can hit send on that, I will even throw it in the board
Okay.
package that is
Perfect.
magically developing this today.
Perfect. And I don't know what other headers prettiness needs to be on there, so I'll send it along. And if there's something else you need to add, you can do that.
It'll be simple.
Okay. All right. Am I forgetting anything?
That's it. That's awesome.
Okay. All right. You guys just got back 41 minutes of your Friday. So, meeting adjourned.
Okay, meeting adjourned, and for the record, it is 11:19 a.m.
Great. Thank you, everybody. This was great
Thank you.
discussion.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Elizabeth.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.